and he's perched right next to Doc Spencer, Danny, and Danny's dad. And we're very interested in what happens to the pheasants today, because in chapter 19 that we're reading at the moment, Mrs Clipstone was delivering the pheasants to everybody in a giant pram with baby Christopher on top, and suddenly, as she was walking along the lane, the pheasants started to wake up. Suddenly, out of the pram, straight up into the air, flew an enormous pheasant. My father let out a cry of horror. The fool in the lorry began roaring with laughter. The pheasant flapped around drunkenly for a few seconds, then lost height and landed on the grass by the side of the road. So it's still quite sleepy. So it's flown up, gone, and come back down to earth again. Crikey, Doc Spencer said. Look at that. A grocer's van came up behind the lorry and began hooting to get by. Mrs Clipstone kept on running. Then whoosh, a second pheasant flew up out of the pram. Then a third and a fourth. Great Scott, Doc Spencer said. I know what's happening. It's the sleeping pills. They're wearing off. My father didn't say a word. Mrs Clipstone covered the last 50 yards at a tremendous pace. She came swinging into the filling station with birds flying out of the pram in all directions. What on earth is happening? She shrieked. She pulled up sharp against the first pump and seized the screaming infant in her arms and dragged him clear. With the weight of the child suddenly lifted away, a great cloud of pheasants suddenly rose up out of the gigantic pram. There must have been well over 100 of them, and the whole sky above us was filled with huge brown birds clapping their wings. A sleeping pill doesn't last forever, Doc Spencer said, shaking his head sadly. It always wears off by the next morning. The pheasants were too dopey to fly far. In a few... let me change the picture here. Oh. Now, so let me get back to a picture. I'm doing this one-handed tonight. There she is. The pheasants were too dopey to fly far. In a few seconds, down they came again and settled themselves like a swarm of locusts all over the filling station. The place was covered with them. They sat wing to wing along the roof of the workshop, and about a dozen were clinging to the sill of the office window. Some of them had flown down onto the rack that held the bottles of lubricating oil, and others were sliding about on the bonnet of Doc Spencer's car. One cockbird with a fine tail was perched superbly on top of a petrol pump, and quite a number, those that were too drunk to do anything else, simply squatted in the driveway at our feet, fluffing their feathers and blinking their small eyes. So if you can imagine, this is the cock pheasant sat right on top of Danny's dad's garage. My father stayed remarkably calm. Well, he'd have to be, wouldn't it? His whole garage has been covered with pheasants. The driveway to his garage has been covered with pheasants. And Doc Spencer's car has been covered with pheasants. They're all sitting there, all sleepy. But not more Mrs Clipstone. They nearly pecked him to pieces, this poor little baby. She was crying, clasping the screaming baby to her. Take him into the caravan, Mrs Clipstone, my father said. All these birds are making him nervous, and Danny, push that pram into the workshop quick. Mrs Clipstone disappeared into our caravan with the baby. I pushed the pram into the workshop. Across the road, a line of cars had already started forming behind the brick lorry and the grocery van. People were opening their doors and getting out and beginning to cross over to stare at the pheasants. Watch out, Dad! Watch out, Dad! Dad, look who's here! Mr Victor Hazell had arrived. Oh, Mr Hazell's arrived on his way to his shoot to find Danny's dad's filling station covered in pheasants. I wondered what he's going to say. Find out tomorrow.